Everyone wants to know the famous last words of their heroes. There is something deeply human about this obsession, the idea that a person's final breath carries weight beyond anything else they ever said. Academics and amateurs alike have hunted down these deathbed utterances for centuries, desperate to understand what a dying mind truly values. And what they've found is extraordinary, because what a person chooses to say in their final moments reveals everything: their character, their fears, their regrets, and sometimes the brutal truth about how they lived. Today, we're going to look at 10 of history's most iconic figures, and we're going to let their last words speak for themselves. Archimedes, do not disturb my circles. 212 BCE. The Roman army has just conquered the city of Syracuse. The streets are chaos, soldiers are flooding through the gates, and Roman general Marcus Claudius Marcellus has issued a direct order: find Archimedes, bring him back alive. But his soldiers never followed through, because when they found him, Archimedes wasn't running, he wasn't hiding, he was crouched on the floor, completely absorbed in a mathematical diagram he had drawn in the sand. He didn't even look up. And when he finally spoke, it wasn't to beg for his life, it wasn't to negotiate. He simply said, "Noli turbare circulos meos." Do not disturb my circles. Those were his last words. Moments later, he was dead. It's a haunting image, one of the greatest minds in human history, killed not in battle, not in disgrace, but while doing the one thing he loved most, so lost in his work that death itself was a mere interruption. 2. Charlemagne. Into your hands, Lord, I commend my spirit. January 28th, 814 CE. Charlemagne, king of the Franks, king of the Lombards, the first Holy Roman Emperor, lay dying in his palace at Aachen. He had been fading since autumn, and he knew exactly what was coming. So he spent his final weeks preparing, praying, fasting, reading the Bible. And when the moment finally arrived, he didn't cry out in fear. He didn't rage against the dying of the light. He simply closed his eyes and whispered, "Into your hands, Lord, I commend my spirit." The same words spoken by Jesus Christ on the cross, recorded in the Gospel of Luke. The man who had ruled half of Europe chose, in the end, to leave this world with nothing but humility and faith. Remarkable for a man who had conquered so much of it. 3. Cardinal Wolsey. If I had served God as diligently as I have done the king, he would not have given me over in my gray hairs. November 29th, 1530, Leicester Abbey. Cardinal Wolsey had once been the most powerful man in England, wealthier than the king himself, untouchable. But ambition has a way of turning on those who serve it too well. He had fallen from grace, stripped of his titles, and was now making a final, desperate journey back to London to face judgment, a journey his failing body could not complete. He never made it. Lying in the abbey, surrounded by monks and servants, he looked at his most loyal attendant, George Cavendish, and spoke his final confession. If I had served God as diligently as I have done the king, he would not have given me over in my gray hairs. 24 words, a lifetime of regret compressed into a single sentence. He had spent everything, every waking hour, every ounce of his genius in service to a mortal king. And as he lay dying, he understood, too late, what that had cost him. He died at 8 o'clock that morning, the son of an Ipswich butcher who had risen higher than almost anyone in England and fallen further than most. 4. Catherine Howard. I would rather have died the wife of Thomas Culpeper. February 13th, 1542. The Tower of London. Catherine Howard was probably no more than 20 years old. She had been Queen of England for barely a year, and on this cold February morning, she was about to be executed for treason. She had not taken it well. The night before her death, she reportedly had the executioner's block brought to her chambers, and then, in the dark, she practiced over and over, laying her head down, preparing herself for the unthinkable. When she finally walked to the scaffold, she was barely holding together. But then, according to history, something changed. She lifted her head, looked out at the crowd, and spoke words that no condemned queen was ever supposed to say. "I may die a queen, but I would rather have died the wife of Thomas Culpeper." A public confession, a declaration of love for the man she wasn't supposed to love, a final act of defiance against the king who had condemned her. Whether those were truly her last words, historians still debate, but the image endures, a terrified young woman finding in her very last moment something that looked an awful lot like courage. 5. Marie Antoinette. Pardon me, sir, I did not mean to do it. October 16th, 1793. The French Revolution had consumed everything. The monarchy was gone, the king was dead, and now Marie Antoinette, once the most powerful woman in France, stood on a scaffold before a roaring crowd, moments from death. Her executioner was Charles-Henri Sanson, the same man who had killed her husband 10 months earlier. As she stepped onto the scaffold, she accidentally trod on his foot, and in that moment, surrounded by bloodlust, by revolution, by everything that had destroyed her world, she paused and apologized. "Pardon me, sir, I did not mean to do it." That was it. That was the last thing Marie Antoinette ever said. Not a declaration, not a defiant speech, just a reflex of politeness from a woman raised to observe every social grace, even at the very end. Sanson raised her head to the crowd. They roared, "Vive la République!" 6. Napoleon Bonaparte. France, the army. Josephine. May 5th, 1821. The island of St. Helena. Napoleon Bonaparte had once ruled an empire stretching across most of Europe. He had won battles that still echo through military history. He had reshaped the map of the world. Now he was dying alone, in exile, on a remote island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. In his final hours, his companions gathered close, straining to hear him through the delirium. Most of what he said was incoherent, fragments, whispers, words that dissolved before they could be caught. But 3 words came through clearly, confirmed by multiple witnesses. France, the army, Josephine. His country, his life's work, and the woman he had loved, divorced, and never stopped thinking about. That was what Napoleon Bonaparte held on to as the darkness closed in. Not power, not conquest, not empire. Just those 3 things. 7. Anna Pavlova. Bring me my swan costume. January 23rd, 1931. The Hague, Netherlands. Anna Pavlova was the most celebrated ballerina in the world. Over the course of her career, she had performed The Dying Swan, a 4-minute solo piece, more than 4,000 times. Now, lying in her hotel room, dying of pleurisy at just 49 years old, she looked up at the people gathered around her bedside, and she said, bring me my swan costume." She never performed again. She died that night. But the show, as they say, went on. On the night she was next scheduled to perform, the curtain rose as planned. There was no replacement dancer. Instead, a single spotlight moved slowly across the empty stage, tracing the path she would have danced. 8. Oscar Wilde. Either that wallpaper goes or I do. November 30th, 1900, Paris. Oscar Wilde had been one of the most celebrated writers of his age. Brilliant, sharp, and ruthlessly funny. A man whose every word seemed designed to make you laugh and think at the same time. By the end of his life, he had lost nearly everything: poverty, debt, illness. His final room in a cheap Paris hotel was, by all accounts, deeply unpleasant. And as he lay there, staring up at the walls, Oscar Wilde summoned whatever remained of his legendary wit. Either that wallpaper goes or I do. Moments later, he did. It is almost certainly the greatest exit line in history. 9. Winston Churchill, I'm bored with it all. January 24th, 1965. Winston Churchill had survived 2 world wars, a stroke, a plane crash, and decades of political warfare. He had inspired a nation at its darkest hour. He had outlasted enemies, rivals, and most of his generation. And at the very end, having lived one of the most extraordinary lives in modern history, his final words were, "I'm bored with it all." 9 days later, he was gone. There is something almost perfect about that. A man who had seen everything, done everything, and survived everything. Finally, simply done. October 14th, 1977. La Moraleja Golf Course, Madrid. Bing Crosby had just finished 18 holes of golf on a beautiful autumn afternoon. He was in good spirits, walking back toward the clubhouse with his playing partners, when he turned to them with a smile. "That was a great game of golf, fellas. Let's go have a Coca-Cola." He collapsed before he reached the door. A heart attack. Instant. He never knew what hit him. And in a strange way, that's exactly how Bing Crosby would have wanted it. Walking off the course on a good day, with nothing left to regret. 10 lives, 10 final moments, 10 last breaths. Some chose prayer, some chose defiance, some chose humor, some had no choice at all. But in each case, those last words tell us something true, something that all the biographies and history books combined cannot quite capture. They tell us what mattered. At the very end, when there was nothing left to perform or protect, what actually mattered.